This part of the lecture, we are actually going to go over the MI strategies. So if you remember, we just learned MI principles, expressing empathy, developing discrepancy, rolling with resistance, and supporting self-efficacy. Now we're actually going to go over MI strategies. So open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and then summarizing. So if you are an acronym person, what you might notice is that this acronym is OARS. So you're going to kind of see this OR in each one of the slides, and hopefully that helps you remember these different strategies that we can use in MI, because I know there's a lot to learn with motivational interviewing. So let's go ahead and start with open-ended questions. So first and foremost, I want you to think, what is an open-ended question, right? So if you were to write an open-ended question, what would it be? Think about that for a second. Hopefully what we're recognizing, that open-ended question isn't going to have a response of yes or no, right? Or fill in the blank, right? Open-ended questions start with things like how and what and tell me why. Okay, so open-ended questions are things that we're going to gather kind of more broad and description information. Like I said, they start with things like how and what and tell me about. And they usually go from general, so big picture questions, and then you eventually go to specific questions. So that's what O stands for in OARS. Okay. The second thing is affirmations, and affirmations are compliments and statements of appreciation and understanding. So you've probably in the fitness field have all heard about positive affirmations, right? And affirmations can be incredibly powerful when used correctly. So they need to be authentic, and they need to be genuine, and they need to be perceived as real, right? So essentially when we use affirmations is to praise positive behaviors, and we can support our clients as they start to describe difficult situations. So for instance, if they are describing a situation that they had at work where it was really challenging with a coworker, what you can say is, you know, it sounds like that was a really difficult situation to be in, but some of your leadership skills came into play when you were kind of mitigating that conversation with so-and-so and so-and-so. So in that moment, you're giving them an affirmation, right? You're reflecting back on them some of their positive behaviors that helped with that scenario. So here are a few other examples of affirmations, right? I appreciate how hard it must have been for you to decide to come here. You took a big step. I want to pause, and I want to emphasize how important thanking your clients are for them coming to be with you. So it's a simple gesture, but oftentimes overlooked. And what we need to recognize is that our clients have lives and they're busy. And for them to take the time out of their day and money out of their pockets to pay to be with you is a big thing. So expressing that appreciation is really, really important. Here's another example. I've enjoyed talking with you today and getting to know you a little more, or a little bit. Okay, again, ending kind of with that positive affirmation. And then another example is you seem to be a very giving person. You're always helping your friends. So those are really nice things, right? That when you hear that as a client, you hear that and you think this person is understanding. They're listening to me. They get me. Okay. So why do we go through this affirmation process? Well, first, it supports and promotes self-efficacy. So if we want our clients to feel confident in that specific health behavior, then we need to give them and let them understand and affirm them in ways that support that health behavior. Okay? And it also prevents discouragement. It helps build rapport between you and your client. So build rapport, they start to respect you a little bit more as a coach. And it reinforces open exploration. Essentially what that means is client talk. It allows them and confirms with them that what they're saying is helpful and beneficial, and it kind of makes them feel like they want to talk more. And that leads us to reflective listening, right? The O part of our OARS. Reflective listening is an essential tool in working with clients and having good communication with people, but particularly in motivational interviewing. So it is a foundational skill in MI. However, it is a very challenging skill, and what you need to do in reflective listening is that you have to demonstrate to your client that you not only have accurately heard what they're saying, but you understand it, right? And so that can be really, really challenging. But if you do this right, you are going to help express empathy, okay? And so when we think about communication, there are really 4 places that communication can go wrong, right? So first and foremost, it can happen with what the speaker is actually saying. So the speaker chooses words that don't actually represent what they want to say. The second place that it can go wrong is how they say it, right? So it's not just what they mean, but it's how they say it. Inflection and tone, okay, that's a big one. We don't recognize how much our inflection in our voice matters. Third place that it can go wrong is the words that the listener hears. And the fourth place that it can go wrong is how it's interpreted. So these are 4 things that can go wrong based on Thomas Gordon's model of listening in communication. And that's important for us to recognize that it's kind of equally distributed not only between the person who is speaking, but the person who is listening. So as the person who's speaking, as the coach, it's important that we understand this and that we can use things like reflective listening to help this communication between our clients and ourselves be improved. So reflective listening is a way of checking rather than assuming that you know what is meant. And I think that's what's so powerful about reflective listening, is that oftentimes in communication, we assume a lot of things. Reflective listening lets us pause and have this moment with our client where we say, oh, it sounds like this. And then our clients can say, actually, you know what? No, it's a little bit more like this. And in that moment, rather than just assuming something, you've checked, and now you have a better understanding of your client's experiences and perspectives. And they feel like you care. They feel like you're trying to understand. So why do we need to do this? Why do we need to listen reflectively? Well, first, it demonstrates that you have accurately heard and understood your client, and that is so key. Second, it helps with that empathetic relationship, which we know is needed in MI. Third, it encourages further explorations of problems and feelings. It can help that communication and that conversation going. And then lastly, it can be used to strategically facilitate change. In MI, about half of all of our responses as coaches are going to be reflections. So essentially, when I spoke earlier about us not talking a lot, half of what we even talk about is going just to be reflections of what the person is saying, okay? 2 to 3 reflections are offered per question usually. Again, but this isn't an actual science, so you don't need to check off, I've done 3, okay? The key here is not, in motivational interviewing, most of the people who are talking is mostly going to be your client. And then when we are talking as the coach or the CPT, we're talking mostly about reflections. So we'll ask some open-ended questions, right? We'll give some affirmations, and then we're going to ask these reflective questions to keep our client talking. Reflective listening begins with thinking reflectively, and it requires a continued awareness of what you think people mean may not be actually what they mean. And so you can utilize reflective listening sometimes to bring your client into an understanding of certain discrepancies that exist between point A and point B, where they are and where they want to be, right? So you can utilize reflective listening as a very powerful tool in helping your client better understand their own behavior. Here's a few examples here. So your client says, I couldn't keep the weight off even if I lost it. And I wonder how many of you have heard things like that, even if it's not from your client, maybe a family member or a friend. As a CPT or a coach, you can then say, it sounds like you're rather discouraged about trying again. In that moment, your client now feels more understood. They feel connected to you, and there's this level of rapport that you now have because they know that you understand them. Here are some things that are not reflective listening. Ordering, directing, commanding them, warning them, cautioning them. Well, if you don't do this, you're going to be at a higher risk, right? Giving advice that's not invoked or that they want. Persuading them, lecturing them, preaching, judging, criticizing. These are all kind of negative, right? Negative things that we don't want to have in communicating with our clients. Similarly, we don't want to shame them. We don't want to overly praise them for things that they're not doing right? That needs to come out authentically. We want to make sure that the questioning and sympathizing that we do is done so in a way that's productive and that honors what they want to do and how they want to change. Okay. So really, sometimes we need to, in our reflective listening, we need to refocus, right? So shift the person's attention away from what seems to be a stumbling block in the way of progress. So in that previous example I gave you, there's definitely a stumbling block. And that's going to happen. Your clients are going to come to you and say, I would have done this, but here's this thing that exists, right? This barrier to me that is in the way of me achieving my goals. So here's an example. Your client's going to give me, or you're probably going to give me a diet that I need to stick to and tell me that I have to get some of these exercise machines or go to the gym every day. This is a common statement from someone who hasn't had a great experience with the health and fitness industry. So say a client says that to you, and for you as a CPT, as a coach, you're going to say, I don't really know enough about you yet. So how about we get started and we start to talk about things that make sense for you? So what do you need to do right now? Right? So those are some ways to kind of right away take off that barrier and take down that guard that your client has. So what I would love for you to do is I would love for you to actually practice your reflective listening skills before you come into lab. So without telling them, right, find a friend or a family member and just ask them about a habit or behavior or something that they want to change. If it can be health related, I think that's even more special because that's your field. So ask them to think about, hey, is there anything you've been thinking about changing for your health behaviors recently? And I want you to listen. And I want you to try to practice that reflective listening skill, right? Do that a few times. See how it feels. See if it's natural. Practice. If it doesn't work, try on another person. The more you practice the skill, the better you're going to get at it. And then I want you to reflect. I want you to reflect on how that communication went. How do you feel? Do you feel more knowledgeable about what they want to achieve? Do you feel more connected to them? Ask them, how do they feel? This is something I'm going to ask you all about when we come into lab next week. So right now, here's a great space or time to do a learning recap. I want you to list and describe the 4 MI strategies, not the principles, but the strategies. Remember that OARS acronym, okay? I want you to be able to understand each one of those and how we can implement them with a MI approach. Our next lecture is going to be on change talk.